My name is Elena Ward. I am 31 years old, and for most of my adult life, my family introduced me at dinner parties as the one who studies languages, always with a small laugh at the end. The kind of laugh you attach to a child's hobby. They said it the way you'd say someone collects stamps. What they never asked, not once in 9 years, was where those languages had taken me. If they had asked, even a single time, they would have known that the little sister they seated at the far end of every table had stood in rooms where a mistranslated sentence could cost governments millions. But they never asked, and so, on a gray Tuesday morning in October, when I walked into the 40th floor boardroom where my brother's $30 million deal was collapsing in real time, my father looked at me the way you'd look at a waitress who had wandered into surgery. My brother, Marcus, actually laughed, a short, nervous laugh, and said, "Elena, this is a private meeting." And then Mr. Chen, chairman of the Huaxin Investment Group, the man whose signature my brother had been chasing for 11 months, rose from his chair. All 12 people at that table went silent. He walked past my brother's extended hand, stopped in front of me, and greeted me by name. In Mandarin. With a bow of the head he had never once offered anyone in that room. My father's face did something I had never seen it do in 31 years. It went completely, perfectly blank. To understand how we got to that boardroom, and to understand what I found buried on page 47 of that contract, the thing that would end up saving the same people who had spent a decade mocking me, I need to take you back. Because this story doesn't begin in a boardroom. It begins at a kitchen table with a report card. I grew up as the second child of Richard Ward, founder of Ward Logistics, a freight and supply chain company he had built from 2 trucks into a regional name. My brother Marcus was 4 years older, and from the day he could walk, he was the heir. That word was never spoken out loud, but it didn't need to be. It was in the way my father took Marcus to the warehouse on Saturdays and left me home. It was in the way Marcus's B- in economics was a strong foundation, while my straight A's in French and Mandarin were nice, but what will you do with that? I want to be precise here because this matters. My family never screamed at me. There was no cartoonish villainy in our house. What there was instead was a slow, patient, smiling dismissal. 1,000 small moments where my work was treated as decoration. When I got my degree in interpretation and translation, my father's toast at dinner was, word for word, "To Elena, may she someday find a use for it." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. That's the part I regret most, looking back. I laughed with them because I still believed that if I just achieved enough, quietly enough, someone at that table would eventually turn to me and ask a real question. Interpreters are trained to do something most people never learn. We listen completely. Not to reply, not to defend ourselves, just to receive, with total accuracy, what is actually being said. And when I turned that training on my own family, at Sunday dinners and birthday lunches, what I heard underneath their words was very simple. You don't matter here. You are the footnote of this family. So I stopped bringing my life to their table. I stopped mentioning the trade delegations, the ministerial summits, the conference booths in Geneva and Singapore. For 6 years they knew nothing, and they were comfortable knowing nothing. Which is why none of them, not one, had any idea who I was to the man on the other side of my brother's $30 million deal. Let me tell you about the dinner where my brother told me to go translate a menu, because that sentence, that exact sentence, is the reason I did what I did later in that boardroom, the way I did it. It was my father's 62nd birthday, back in March. 22 people around the long table at his favorite steakhouse, family, 2 of his golf friends, and, this is the important part, 3 senior people from Ward Logistics, including the company's lawyer, a careful man named Douglas, who had been with my father for 20 years. Marcus had just closed a mid-sized contract with a Canadian distributor, and the whole dinner had quietly become a celebration of him, which was fine. I had long since made peace with orbiting my brother like a small, dim moon. The trouble started when Douglas, the lawyer, made polite conversation with me. He asked what I did. I said I worked in conference interpretation, and Douglas, genuinely interested, the only person at that table who was, leaned in and asked, "Simultaneous? That's an incredibly demanding field. Which languages?" Before I could answer, Marcus's voice came down the table like a hand on my shoulder, pushing me back into my seat. "Careful, Doug. She'll start charging you by the hour." Laughter. Then he raised his glass, smiled at me with all the warmth of a man feeding a dog under the table, and said, "Elena's our little linguist. Hey, the waiter's Italian, right? Go translate the menu for us. That's about your speed." More laughter. My father laughed. My mother smiled into her wine. Douglas, to his credit, did not laugh. He looked down at his plate, embarrassed for me. And I did what I had trained my whole life to do. I received the message with total accuracy. I smiled, I said something light, and inside, very calmly, I closed a door. People always ask, the same way they'd ask Clara, or any woman who has lived inside this kind of family, "Why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you stand up at that table and list your credentials, your clients, the summits, the ministries?" And the answer is that defending yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you is like interpreting for someone who has taken their headphones off. The words are perfect. Nobody is receiving them. There's something else you need to know about that spring, something I only learned in fragments later. Ward Logistics was in trouble. Not dying, but bleeding. 2 major contracts lost to bigger competitors, margins shrinking, my father quietly mortgaging warehouse space. Marcus's answer to this was a swing for the fences, a partnership with the Huaxin Investment Group, a Shanghai-based fund expanding aggressively into North American logistics. $30 million in investment and exclusive distribution rights. If it closed, Ward Logistics wouldn't just survive, it would triple. If it failed, my father's company, his whole life, was on a 2-year countdown. Marcus had been courting Huaxin for 11 months. Flights to Shanghai, dinners, gifts chosen by a consultant. And he told everyone, constantly, how well it was going, how the Chinese side loves us, how it was practically signed. Here's what Marcus did not know. Huaxin's chairman, Mr. Chen Weiming, is a careful man, famously careful. For any negotiation above $10 million, he insists on one non-negotiable condition: a certified, independent interpreter of his own approval in the room, not the counterparty's translator, not an app. A professional bound by a code of ethics older than most companies, whose only loyalty in that room is to the accuracy of the words themselves. And for the past 4 years, at 3 trade summits and 2 ministerial visits, the interpreter Mr. Chen requested by name, the one he trusted enough to joke with in the corridor afterward, the one he called the quiet one who never loses a number, was a 31-year-old woman whose own family believed her ceiling was a steakhouse menu. He knew me as Miss Ward. It never once occurred to him, or to me, that the Ward in Ward Logistics was the same word. I need to show you my world for a moment, the one my family never saw, because otherwise the boardroom won't make sense. Simultaneous interpretation is one of the few professions where the human brain is pushed to its documented limit. You listen in one language, convert meaning, not words meaning, and speak in another language, all within a 2-second delay, for hours. Neurologists have studied us the way they study air traffic controllers. One wrong number in a trade negotiation, 15% instead of 50, and deals die, lawsuits bloom, careers end. That is why, at the highest level, this work runs on something very rare: absolute trust. I had spent 9 years building that trust, invisible by design. An interpreter's job is to be a pane of glass, perfectly clear, never noticed. I had been the glass between trade ministers in Geneva. I had been the glass in a Singapore arbitration where $400 million moved on the strength of a subjunctive clause. And I had been the glass 5 separate times for Chen Weiming. The first time, 4 years ago, was a trade summit in Vancouver. Huaxin's scheduled interpreter fell ill. I was the emergency replacement. Mr. Chen tested me the way careful men do. He told a joke, a layered one, with a pun in Shanghainese dialect buried inside the Mandarin. Most interpreters would have flattened it. I carried the pun across, rebuilt it in English so the room laughed at the right moment for the right reason. Mr. Chen looked at me for 2 full seconds. Then he nodded, once. After that summit, his office began requesting me by name. Understand, he was not my friend. That's not how the profession works. But he trusted my accuracy the way you trust a bridge, completely and without needing to discuss it. And in 11 months of watching my brother chase Huaxin's money, no one at Ward Logistics ever thought to ask who Huaxin's trusted interpreter might be. Why would they? Translation, as my family had established over a decade of birthday dinners, was not serious work. The call came on a Thursday in late September. My agency coordinator, Praya, the only person on earth who knew both halves of my life, because contracts required my legal name. Elena, I have a request from Huaxin's office. Chairman Chen, personally. Final contract negotiation in 3 weeks, 30 million range, logistics sector. A pause I could hear her choosing. The counterparty is Ward Logistics. That's your family, isn't it? I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, and I want to be honest with you about what I felt in those 30 seconds, because it wasn't triumph. It was something colder and older. It was every seat at the far end of every table. It was my father's toast. May she someday find a use for it. It was go translate a menu. That's about your speed. All of it, arriving at once in perfect order, like a ledger being opened. There's a conflict of interest, I said, because there was, and because I am good at my job precisely because I say such things out loud. Family relation to the counterparty. Chen's office needs to know before they confirm me. They know, Priya said quietly. That's the part I haven't told you yet. Mr. Chen's chief of staff disclosed it to him this morning. They ran the background check. They connected the name. I assumed he'd withdraw the request. She paused again. He doubled it instead. He said, I'm reading his exact words. Her family is precisely why I want her in the room. She has interpreted for me for 4 years and never once mentioned them. A person who does not use the truth for advantage is the only kind of person I trust to carry it. I said nothing for a long moment. Elena, Priya said, he knows who you are. Your family has no idea who you are, and in 3 weeks, you'll all be in the same room. She exhaled. What do you want me to tell them? I looked out my kitchen window for a moment, and I thought about pages. Contracts have pages the way families have dinners. Most of them are routine, and somewhere in the middle of them, something is always hiding. Tell them I accept, I said, standard terms. Then I went to my desk, opened my laptop, and began to prepare the way I always prepare, completely. I requested every draft of the agreement in both languages. That was the night I first read page 47. Let me explain what an interpreter does in the 3 weeks before a negotiation like this, because it is the opposite of what my family imagined my job to be. I don't just show up and talk. I build a glossary. every technical term the deal touches in both languages, cross-checked freight forwarding terminology, customs bonds, force majeure provisions, arbitration seats. I study both companies until I can draw their org charts from memory. And I read every draft of the agreement in both languages, side by side, line by line, because my job on the day is to carry meaning across a room in 2 seconds. And you can only do that with sentences you have already met. Huaxin's office sent me the document package on a Friday night. The English master draft, the Chinese translation prepared by the law firm representing Huaxin's local subsidiary, and 11 months of amendment history. 206 pages in each language. I made tea, and I began the way I always begin. Page 1, both versions open, my finger moving down the lines in parallel. For 46 pages, the two versions walk together like a couple holding hands. Precise, faithful, professionally rendered. Whoever had done the legal translation was good. Genuinely good. Which is exactly why page 47 stopped me. Clause 9.3, buyout and default provisions. In the English version, the version my brother, my father, and Douglas the lawyer had been reading for 11 months, Clause 9.3 said, in plain terms, if Ward Logistics failed to meet the agreed distribution volumes for 2 consecutive years, Huaxin would have the right to purchase an additional 15% equity stake at fair market valuation. Tough, but standard. The kind of clause you accept when someone hands you $30 million. In the Chinese version, the version that, per clause 22.1, would be the controlling text in any arbitration, because the arbitration seat was Shanghai, clause 9.3 said something else. The volume thresholds were defined differently, using a gross tonnage metric instead of net contracted volume, a difference invisible unless you knew freight terminology in both languages. Under the Chinese definition, Ward Logistics would miss the threshold in the first year, almost mathematically guaranteed, and the purchase right wasn't 15% at market valuation. The character used wasn't shiji, market value. It was a formula pegged to book value, which for an asset-heavy, debt-loaded company like my father's meant roughly a third of what the business was worth. And the stake wasn't capped at 15%. It said up to controlling interest. I read it 4 times. I am trained not to trust my first reading of anything. I checked the tonnage terms against the industry glossary. I checked the valuation characters against 3 legal dictionaries. Then I sat back in my chair and looked at the wall for a long time. Someone had built a trapdoor into this contract. In 11 months of drafts, it had been assembled gradually. I could see it in the amendment history. One small clarification at a time, each individually innocent. Whoever had done it understood exactly what they were doing. The English version was clean because the English version was bait. The Chinese version was the contract. And under 22.1, the Chinese version would win. If my brother signed this, Ward Logistics wouldn't be getting a partner. It would be getting a 2-year countdown to a hostile takeover at a discount. My father's life's work, purchased through a mistranslation nobody was ever supposed to catch. And here's the question I sat with until 3 in the morning, the question that decides everything in this story. Who built the trapdoor? Because it changed everything. If this came from Mr. Chen, from the careful man who had requested me by name, then the man who trusted my accuracy was planning to weaponize it, and I was being hired as a prop in my own family's execution. But if it hadn't come from Chen, then someone standing much closer to that boardroom table was betting $30 million that no one in the room could read both pages at once. They had no way of knowing that the one person on earth who could was the woman they'd sent to translate the menu. Let me explain what an interpreter does in the 3 weeks before a negotiation like this, because it is the opposite of what my family imagined my job to be. I don't just show up and talk. I build a glossary. Every technical term the deal touches. In both languages, cross-checked, freight forwarding terminology, customs bonds, force majeure provisions, arbitration seats. I study both companies until I can draw their org charts from memory. And I read every draft of the agreement in both languages, side by side, line by line, because my job on the day is to carry meaning across a room in 2 seconds. And you can only do that with sentences you have already met. Huaxin's office sent me the document package on a Friday night, the English master draft, the Chinese translation prepared by the law firm representing Huaxin's local subsidiary, and 11 months of amendment history. 206 pages in each language. I made tea, and I began the way I always begin. Page 1, both versions open, my finger moving down the lines in parallel. For 46 pages, the two versions walk together like a couple holding hands. Precise, faithful, professionally rendered. Whoever had done the legal translation was good, genuinely good, which is exactly why page 47 stopped me. Clause 9.3, buyout and default provisions. In the English version, the version my brother, my father, and Douglas the lawyer had been reading for 11 months, Clause 9.3 said, in plain terms, if Ward Logistics failed to meet the agreed distribution volumes for 2 consecutive years, Huaxin would have the right to purchase an additional 15% equity stake at fair market valuation. Tough, but standard. The kind of clause you accept when someone hands you $30 million. In the Chinese version, the version that, per clause 22.1, would be the controlling text in any arbitration, because the arbitration seat was Shanghai, clause 9.3 said something else. The volume thresholds were defined differently, using a gross tonnage metric instead of net contracted volume, a difference invisible unless you knew freight terminology in both languages. Under the Chinese definition, Ward Logistics would miss the threshold in the first year, almost mathematically guaranteed. And the purchase right wasn't 15% at market valuation. The character used wasn't shiji, market value. It was a formula pegged to book value, which for an asset-heavy, debt-loaded company like my father's meant roughly a third of what the business was worth. And the stake wasn't capped at 15%. It said up to controlling interest. I read it 4 times. I am trained not to trust my first reading of anything. I checked the tonnage terms against the industry glossary. I checked the valuation characters against 3 legal dictionaries. Then I sat back in my chair and looked at the wall for a long time. Someone had built a trapdoor into this contract. In 11 months of drafts, it had been assembled gradually. I could see it in the amendment history, one small clarification at a time, each individually innocent. Whoever had done it understood exactly what they were doing. The English version was clean because the English version was bait. The Chinese version was the contract, and under 22.1, the Chinese version would win. If my brother signed this, Ward Logistics wouldn't be getting a partner. It would be getting a 2-year countdown to a hostile takeover at a discount. My father's life's work, purchased through a mistranslation nobody was ever supposed to catch. And here is the question I sat with until 3 a.m, the question that decides everything in this story. Who built the trapdoor? Because it changed everything. If this came from Mr. Chen, from the careful man who had requested me by name, then the man who trusted my accuracy was planning to weaponize it, and I was being hired as a prop in my own family's execution. But if it hadn't come from Chen, then someone standing much closer to that boardroom table was betting $30 million that no one in the room could read both pages at once. They had no way of knowing that the one person on earth who could was the woman they'd sent to translate the menu. I did not sleep that night. not because I was panicking. Interpreters are not permitted panic. We have deadlines instead. But because I was doing what I do, verifying from every angle before trusting a conclusion. By 6 in the morning, I had reconstructed the history of Clause 9.3 across 11 months of drafts, and the pattern was unmistakable. The trapdoor had been installed in 3 separate amendments, months apart. Amendment 4 changed the volume metric for consistency with industry reporting standards. Amendment 7 adjusted the valuation language to align with local accounting terminology. Amendment 9 quietly replaced the equity cap. Each change had been proposed according to the revision logs by the law firm handling the Chinese language version, a Shanghai firm called Renhe Partners, retained not by Huaxin's headquarters, but by Huaxin's North American subsidiary. And the subsidiary's managing director, the man who had personally led every negotiation session with my brother, the man who had taken Marcus to dinners and chosen his gifts and told him for 11 months how much the Chinese side loves us, was a smiling, Stanford-educated executive named Victor Yan. Here is what I knew about Victor Yan that my brother did not. Because my brother's due diligence had consisted of Googling him once. 2 years earlier, in Singapore, I had interpreted for an arbitration panel, a joint venture dispute in the shipping sector. I was the glass in that room for 9 days, and on day 6, a witness described, under oath, a pattern. An executive who engineered divergences between dual language contracts, waited for the default, then presented the controlling language version to seize assets at book value. The scheme had a nickname among the lawyers in that room. They called it the 2-page trick. The executive in question had settled quietly, resigned quietly, and moved quietly to a new fund. I never forget a voice. Interpreters can't afford to. And Victor Yan's voice on the introductory conference call Huaxin's office had sent me for preparation was the same voice I had carried across that arbitration room for 9 days. So now I had my answer. This was not Chen Weiming's trap. Chen was the target's insurance policy without knowing it. His own famous caution, his insistence on an independent interpreter, was the single thread Victor Yan couldn't cut. Yan had built a machine designed to work in the dark, and Chen's one immovable rule was about to walk a floodlight into the room, except the floodlight had a family problem. Think about my position for a moment. Professionally, my duty was crystalline. An interpreter renders what is said and what is written accurately without advocacy. I am not a lawyer. I am not an advisor. If in that boardroom someone read Clause 9.3 aloud in Chinese, my job was to translate it faithfully. And its poison would surface on its own. But if nobody read it aloud, if the signing proceeded on handshakes and summaries the way late-stage signings usually do, then my professional duty was to say nothing. Glass does not volunteer opinions. I could have called my brother that morning. I could have picked up the phone and said, "Marcus, there is a trapdoor on page 47. Your golden partnership is an ambush. And the only reason I know is the career you've spent 10 years laughing at. And I will be honest with you about why I didn't. It's the same reason Clara didn't show Vanessa the photograph. Because they would not have believed me. Picture it. Elena, the family footnote, the menu translator, calling to announce she had found a flaw that Douglas, 20 years of contract law, and 2 outside firms had all missed in a language none of them could read. Marcus wouldn't have checked the clause. He would have checked my motives, and by the time the laughter settled, I would have been the jealous little sister trying to sabotage the deal of his life, and page 47 would still be waiting, patient as a bear trap, under everyone's signatures. No. There was exactly one room in the world where the truth could not be dismissed, spun, or laughed away. The room where both languages, both versions, and both families of witnesses would be sitting at the same table, with me standing at the glass. 3 weeks later, I put on a charcoal gray suit, packed 206 pages of annotations, and took the elevator to the 40th floor. The offices of Huaxin's North American subsidiary occupied the 40th floor of a glass tower downtown, and the boardroom at the end of the hall had been arranged the way these rooms always are for a signing: name cards, bottled water, a long table polished to a black mirror, and two small flags, one American, one Chinese, standing at the center like chess pieces that had agreed to a truce. I arrived 40 minutes early, as I always do, to check sightlines and acoustics. An interpreter chooses her seat the way a sniper chooses a window. I was reviewing my glossary when the Ward logistics delegation came down the hall, and I heard them before I saw them because my brother's confidence has always traveled ahead of him like cologne. Marcus walked in first, in a new suit, carrying the loose, expansive energy of a man who believed he was 40 minutes away from the deal of his life. Behind him came Douglas, the lawyer with his careful gray face. And behind Douglas, my father. Richard Ward, 62 years old, wearing the navy suit he saved for banks and funerals, his jaw set the way it sets when everything he has built is riding on a table he doesn't control. Marcus saw me first. I watched, with an almost clinical interest, the sequence of expressions cross his face: recognition, confusion, recalculation, and then, arriving where he always arrived, condescension. "Elena?" He laughed, short and nervous, glancing back at our father. "What? This is a private meeting. This is a business meeting." He said the word business slowly, the way you'd explain it to a child at a lemonade stand. My father didn't laugh. He looked from me to the name card on the table beside me, the one that read, in 2 languages, E. Ward, certified interpreter, Huaxin Investment Group. And I watched a man attempt arithmetic with numbers he did not possess. "Elena," he said quietly, "what is this?" And that was the exact moment the double doors opened, and Chen Weiming entered with his delegation. You need to understand something about Mr. Chen's entrances. He is a compact, silver-haired man of 68 who has never once raised his voice in any room I have shared with him, because he has never needed to. Silence organizes itself around him. 12 people stood. Marcus stepped forward, hand extended, deploying the greeting he had almost certainly rehearsed in a mirror. Mr. Chen walked past Marcus's hand. He crossed the room to where I stood, stopped, inclined his head, the precise, deliberate nod he reserves for perhaps 4 people on this continent, and said in Mandarin, warm and unhurried, "Ms. Ward, when they told me you had accepted, I knew this negotiation would be a clean one. It is good to see you again." "Chairman Chen," I answered in Mandarin, "the honor is mine, as always." 12 people at that table heard an exchange they could not understand between the chairman they had courted for 11 months and the woman they had sent to translate a menu. I did not look at my family. Glass does not gloat, but glass reflects. And in the black mirror of that table, I could see my father, standing perfectly still, his blank face slowly assembling itself into the first genuine question he had asked about me in a decade. Victor Yan entered last, tailored, smiling, smelling faintly of the kind of confidence that is applied rather than earned. He shook hands down the Ward side of the table, radiating warmth. And then he reached me, and I watched the smile hold while the eyes did something else entirely. A flicker, a file being retrieved. Singapore? 9 days. The glass in the corner of that arbitration room. "Ms. Ward," he said smoothly, in English, "I've heard you're the best." "Mr. Yan," I said, "we've shared a room before." The smile did not move, but his hand, when it left mine, went to straighten a stack of documents that was already perfectly straight. And on top of that stack, bound in blue, sat the Chinese language master version of the contract, page 47 and all. Shall we begin? Said Victor Yan. The first 90 minutes were ceremony. Opening remarks, mutual compliments, the theater of two companies pretending the deal wasn't already emotionally signed. I interpreted it all, clean, invisible, 2 seconds behind every voice. And I watched Victor Yan work. He was good. He steered every discussion toward the commercial terms, volumes, timelines, market projections, and away from the legal architecture. Whenever Douglas raised a contractual point, Yan would smile, gesture at the binders, and say the phrase he had clearly built this entire signing around. The documents have been through 11 months of review by both sides. I suggest we don't relitigate settled language today. Settled language, I translated the phrase faithfully, and as I did, I felt the trap's mechanism click. That was the play. No clause would be read aloud today. Signatures on summaries. The 2-page trick, completing itself in silence. But Yan had one problem he could not steer around, and it was sitting quietly at the head of the table. At the 2-hour mark, Chen Weiming set down his pen, folded his hands, and spoke for the first time in 20 minutes. The room went still. Before signing, he said in Mandarin, and I carried his words into English in real time. It is my practice in any agreement of this size to hear the operative default provisions read aloud, in both languages. An old man's habit. Contracts, like people, reveal their character under pressure, and pressure lives in the default clauses. I translated, and I watched the sentence land on Victor Yan like weather changing. Chairman, Yan said smoothly, of course, though in the interest of time, perhaps the summary matrix. The clauses themselves, said Chen pleasantly, immovably. Section 9, I believe. My brother, who understood none of the subtext, actually nodded along, happy, agreeable, 40 minutes from glory. My father was watching Chen. Douglas was already turning pages. And Victor Yan looked for one unguarded half-second directly at me, because he knew what was on page 47. And he knew that the only bridge between that page and this room, the only human being who would carry those Chinese characters into English ears, was the interpreter he had just remembered from Singapore. Ms. Ward, said Chen, nodding to me, when my counsel reads clause 9.3 in the Chinese master text, you will render it into English for our partners, precisely as always. Of course, Chairman, I said. Yan's counsel opened the blue binder. Douglas opened the white one. 2 versions of the same clause, about to stand up in the same room for the first time in 11 months. The lawyer began to read aloud in Mandarin, and 3 sentences in, I heard the tonnage metric, the wrong one, the trapdoor one, leave his mouth and cross the table toward me. Every eye in the room turned to the glass. I want to freeze this moment because everything I am was inside those 2 seconds. An interpreter's oath is accuracy, not kindness, not loyalty, not rescue. If I softened that clause, I betrayed my profession. If I rendered it precisely, I detonated a $30 million deal in front of the man whose company was dying without it, my father. 2 seconds. That's the delay I'm allowed. I rendered it precisely. Should Ward Logistics fail to meet the minimum thresholds, defined herein as gross tonnage handled, inclusive of subcontracted freight, for 1 calendar year? Douglas's pen stopped moving. Waxine Investment Group shall hold the right to acquire equity up to and including controlling interest. Douglas stood up. Lawyers do not stand up at signings. I'm sorry, that is not the clause. The English master says net contracted volume 2 consecutive years, 15% at fair market valuation. Continue, Ms. Ward, said Chen quietly. Enquete at a price calculated per the formula in Annex F. I looked up. Chairman, for the record, Annex F in the Chinese text pegs the price to book value, The English text says market value. These are not the same clause. They have not been the same clause since Amendment 4. Silence has a weight. This one pressed the whole room flat. My brother laughed. One last reflexive laugh, the sound of a man whose world was arriving late. Okay, hold on. It's a translation error, obviously, right? These things happen. Elena, no offense, but maybe someone qualified should... Ms. Ward, said Chen Weiming, in English now, slowly, so that no one in the room would miss a word, has interpreted for me at 3 trade summits and 2 ministerial delegations. If she says the texts diverge, the texts diverge. He turned his head. Mr. Yan, your firm controlled the Chinese drafting. Explain the divergence. And Victor Yan smiled and reached for the word clerical, and that is when I did the one thing that went beyond my oath. Or fulfilled it, I still don't know. I spoke. Chairman, one clarification for the record. Mr. Yan and I have shared a room before. Singapore, 2 years ago, a joint venture arbitration in the shipping sector. I paused. 2 seconds, my old familiar delay. The panel there heard testimony describing dual language contracts engineered to diverge. The lawyers had a name for it. They called it the 2-page trick. Yan's smile stayed on his face the way a picture stays on the wall of a burning house. Chen Weiming looked at him for a long, motionless moment. Then he said, in Mandarin, 4 flat words I will translate for you the way I translated them for that room. Leave the building, Victor. Victor Yan left the way men like him always leave, insisting all the way to the elevator that this was a misunderstanding his lawyers would clarify. Nobody answered him. 2 of Chen's aides followed him out, and through the glass wall I watched them collect his badge and his laptop at the security desk. The 2-page trick, dismantled in 4 minutes by the 2 pages finally being read in the same room. What remained was silence, and a table full of people recalculating everything. Chen Weiming broke it. He asked his counsel to suspend the session, ordered a full independent retranslation of all 206 pages, and then, in English, addressing my father directly for the first time all day, said, Mr. Ward, my apologies. The corruption occurred inside my own house, and I will repair it inside my own house. The deal, if you still want it, stands on the English terms, the honest ones. My father, who had not spoken in almost an hour, said, Thank you, Chairman. His voice sounded 10 years older than it had that morning. His eyes were not on Chen. They were on me. But the moment I will keep until I die came a few minutes later, in the corridor, while the aides reset the room. My father approached me the way you approach a stranger you suspect you owe money to. He stood there, this man who had toasted, may she someday find a use for it, and he asked quietly, Elena, what exactly is it that you do? 31 years old. And that was the first time my father had ever asked me that question and waited for the answer. I could have emptied a decade onto him right there in that corridor, Geneva, Singapore, the summits, every dinner, every laugh, the menu. Instead, I heard myself say, very calmly, I listen, Dad, completely. It turns out almost nobody does. He nodded slowly, the way men nod when a bill arrives that they can't dispute. Behind him, Marcus stood near the boardroom door, pale, holding the white binder against his chest, like a man who had been handed back his own life and didn't yet know where to put it. He didn't approach me. Not then. Marcus needed 3 more days, and when he finally called, the first thing he said was not thank you. It was, How long have you known Chen? 4 years, I said. A long silence. Then quietly, You could have told me about the clause. No, Marcus, I said. I couldn't have. You know I couldn't have. You would have laughed. You laughed at a steakhouse in front of 22 people because a lawyer asked me a polite question. I let that sit. The clause had to be read out loud, in that room, in both languages, in front of witnesses no one could dismiss. That's the only language this family has ever actually believed. An audience. He didn't argue. That, honestly, was his first fluent sentence and mine. The contract was re-signed 6 weeks later, clean, verified, both texts certified as identical. $30 million on the honest terms. Ward Logistics survived. My father's life's work survived. Saved, page by page, by the degree he'd toasted as useless. You might expect the family dinners changed overnight. They didn't. Families are like contracts. The amendments come slowly, one clause at a time. The first Sunday dinner after the signing 3 weeks later was the strangest meal of my life. Not because anyone apologized. Nobody did. Not yet. But because of the silence where the jokes used to live. Marcus reached the punchline spot of an old reflex, the little linguist spot, and simply stopped. Nobody filled it. My mother watched him not say it, and then looked at me, and something passed across her face that I chose not to translate. It was Douglas, of all people. The lawyer, the only one who hadn't laughed at that steakhouse, who said it out loud. He'd been invited to dinner to toast the closed deal, and he raised his glass and said, "To Elena," who read the one page that mattered. And then, deliberately, looking at my father, "Two firms and I missed it, Richard. 20 years of contract law, and we missed it. She caught it in one night." He let that hang exactly long enough. You should know what almost happened. My father cleared his throat and lifted his glass. And this man, who gives toasts the way other men sign documents, carefully, committing to nothing, said, "To my daughter, who found a use for it after all." A beat. And to me, learning what it actually was, about 10 years too late. It wasn't an apology. It was the Ward family's native dialect, for one. And I am, professionally, very good at translating dialects. The real change came smaller and quieter, the way real change does. My father started calling on Thursdays. Not to ask for anything, just to ask where I'd been that week, and then, this is the part that still catches me, he would listen to the answer. Marcus sent me the revised Huaxian correspondence to have another set of eyes, his dialect for "I trust you." My mother framed a photograph from a Geneva summit she found online. Me in the booth, headset on, invisible and essential, and hung it in the hallway between Marcus's diplomas. And Chen Weiming? At the re-signing, he stood, thanked the room, and then said, in English, deliberately, so my whole family would hear every word, "In 40 years of business, I have learned there are two kinds of people. Those who use the truth and those who carry it. Ms. Ward carries it. Companies are lucky to have such people." He paused, with an old man's perfect timing. Families, even more so. My father did not stop nodding for a long time. Here is what I want you to take from this, because it's the reason I told you the story at all. For 10 years, my family didn't laugh at my job. They laughed at what they had decided my job was, because they never asked, and I eventually stopped offering. And the trap that almost destroyed them was built out of exactly that same material, two versions of the truth side by side that nobody bothered to read together. Victor Yan did to their contract precisely what they had done to me. He counted on no one checking the other page. Being underestimated is a strange kind of power. It's quiet. It costs you years. But it means that when you finally stand up in the right room, at the right table, nobody has prepared a single defense against you, because nobody believed you were worth defending against. My name is Elena Ward. For 10 years, my family sat me at the far end of the table. Now they ask me to read things first. If you've ever been the footnote of your own family, if someone has ever decided who you are without asking, tell me your moment in the comments. I read every one, completely. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and send it to someone who's still waiting to be asked the question. Take care of yourselves.